Hello all, and thank you for watching this presentation on static stretching. This is my Module 3 discussion for AES 6600, Principles of Sports Performance Training. Like many of you, I'm pretty aware of the research into the detrimental effects of acute static stretching prior to strength and power performance. So this is always something that I've limited my use of and focused a lot more on dynamic stretching when working with athletes. But for that, I chose it for that reason because I wanted to investigate this specific modality a little bit more. So when should static stretching be implemented? As much as there is some research to say to not do it prior to strength and power activities, more recent research has actually indicated that the detrimental effects on strength and power are limited when static stretching is done after aerobic warm-up, but before dynamic stretching and more high-intensity sport-specific warm-up activities, that there is about an only 1 to 2% decrease in strength and power. It can also be done during interset rest periods to inhibit antagonist muscles. I've seen this done after a squat, say, stretching some of the antagonist muscles to allow the prime movers to be more active. It can be done as part of its own independent flexibility training session, and I think it can also be effective when athletes do it prior to bed as part of a wind down routine to help athletes sleep better. Some of the theoretical performance benefits that have been proposed include a reduced risk of musculotendinous injury, especially when done prior to high-intensity activities such as sprinting and change of direction drills. It's been proposed that it can optimize length-tension relationships and therefore increase force production. It can allow full range of motion that is necessary for sporting actions, but remember, range of motion needs vary by sport. Some have greater than others. It's also important to understand that there's a difference between the effects of acute stretching and chronic stretching. Specifically, acute stretching is going to have a primarily neural effect on performance, whereas chronic stretching is going to have a morphological effect on performance. Some other physiological considerations: muscle and fascia have greater elasticity and plasticity than tendons, so it's important that any flexibility routine, so that includes foam rolling, but also chronic stretching, is targeting these structures, that is muscle and fascia. The physiological factors that underlie static stretching's detrimental effects on subsequent strength and power performance, especially when that static stretching is done for longer than 60 seconds, are numerous. Some of those factors that have been proposed include decreased motor neuron effects from sensory feedback from a stretched muscle spindle, suboptimal length tension relationships, as opposed to the optimal ones that might also occur, and decreased binding of calcium ions to tropin and thereby limiting myosin's ability to bind to actin. Current literature, so the previous research that examined these detrimental effects on static stretching is not wrong, but things are more complicated if we look at the more recent research. Recent research, so if we look at Chabin et al. 2019, found that 60 seconds or less has a trivial impact on subsequent strength and power, especially when it's part of a larger warm-up routine. There is also some evidence, as cited by Chabin et al. 2019, that it may lower risk of musculotendinous injury, and that may outweigh the negative impacts on strength and power, especially in recreational athletes. There is also some evidence, as proposed by Bem et al. 2021, that by improving length-tension relationships through stretching, force production may actually be increased. Some of my key takeaways from looking into static stretching: if we're going to implement it as part of a warm-up, we should follow these steps. Start with aerobic activity to increase the temperature of, increase blood flow and increase body temperature. Then perform static stretching in a way that is task-specific to the needs of the sport and focuses on short and overactive muscles. Then perform dynamic stretching. Then perform high-intensity activities, either agility drills or, say, small area games. It's also important to remember the demands of the sport. Is this gymnastics with high degrees of ROM needed, or is it something like rugby where we care more about strength and power? Where we need more ROM and more flexibility, focus more on static stretching and be very cautious when implementing static stretching in athletes who have great strength and power needs. Here are my references, and thank you very much for watching.